Good afternoon, and welcome to this session of the Halftime Talk, an interview series that features global executives who detail critical trends impacting energy markets and highlight signals to monitor for what is ahead. Today, we're looking at current trends in Latin America, and we're looking to lift the veil on what energy stakeholders can expect next coming out of the continent. From the Rio Grande to the Patagonia, we saw in 2022 a turn to the left, where the political pendulum swung back from the right and back to the left. And by extension, the region's outlook for the year lies at this intersection of its leftist turn combined with its commodities wealth, oil chief among them. I'm happy to welcome today's guest and hear his insights and perspectives. We have with us today Carlos Garibaldi, Chairman of Plata Energy and Executive Secretary of ARPEL. With over 40 years of industry experience, Carlos has an expertise in corporate strategy, portfolio planning, and business development, among others. Carlos, thank you for being with us here today.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. I'm here in representation of ARPEL, which is the Association of Oil, Gas, and Renewable Energy Companies of Latin America and the Caribbean. As you said about the pendulum swings, there's never a boring day in Latin America since about 3 decades ago. Several countries in the region have swung like a pendulum between economic orthodoxy and either left or right wing populists with increasing polarization. What are the effects of this in the oil and gas sector? Well, we've been swinging from opening to foreign investment and letting commodity prices drive domestic prices on one side, to petronationalism, protectionism, and energy price controls and subsidies on the other side. Now, this is a long-established dynamic, but it has been increasingly affected by a new factor, which is climate change awareness and the resulting urgency for a transition towards renewable energies that emit much less greenhouse gases. As we all know, scientific evidence and consensus leave little doubt that climate change is a reality, that it has an anthropogenic component, and that its impacts are already evident today, and that it must be mitigated. This factor necessarily conditions all decisions in the energy sector, regardless of government ideology. To complicate this even further, we had the Black Swan disruption about a year ago with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has since evolved from a conjunctural event to a structural situation. In consequence, and again, regardless of political ideology, all countries must confront the famous trilemma between energy security and sovereignty, equitable access, and environmental sustainability. Our energy industry sustainability thus implies the convergence of providing a physically accessible, reliable, deliverable, and affordable energy supply, all within environmental and social boundary constraints. And we believe this is the biggest geopolitical variable today. In many countries of my region in particular, hydrocarbons play a significant, fundamental economic prosperity role, as they imply fiscal revenues, foreign direct investment, exports, GDP, and poverty abatement. This creates a tension between energy security and energy transition that, although it might momentarily affect the pace of the transition, it doesn't affect its course.
Great, thank you. And you've touched on a lot of points there to kick it off. The trilemma within the world of energy, the swing of the pendulum from the right back to the left, movements in foreign direct investment. And given all of those trends, would you describe the biggest geopolitical variable in the region in energy to be, what would you say is the biggest variable for energy in Latin America? Would you say that it is this now focused towards sustainability, or are there other factors that are taking more of a priority?
No, it is this tension that I mentioned between energy security and energy transition. But we think that this is, like I said, it's maybe slowing the pace of energy transition, but energy transition is irreversible. And so I think that in the long term, it will prevail. It's affecting its pace, but not affecting the course.
I see. And when we start to think about Brazil, the heavyweight, the giant in the region that went from one rightist firebrand president to arguably a leftist firebrand president with a massive change in priorities, Lula, of course, had already been president in Brazil and already had an approach and an energy policy throughout his first presidency. Now, with him beginning another presidential term, how would you describe his energy policy so far? Would you say it's a continuation of the same policy he had his first round as president, or are you seeing some shifts in his policy and his energy approach?
But we don't expect momentous changes because regardless of government ideology, even at the extremes, Brazil has always had a rather consistent energy policy. The sector is normally led by well-trained career industry veterans and technocrats. Lula's PT, the Workers' Party, pragmatically offered concessions to foreign private players when it was in power before, for example. We believe then that Brazil will steadfastly continue to develop and grow its production from the pre-salt play to monetize its 30 to 40 billion barrels of oil of reserves and resources. Its output is expected to reach 7 to 9 million barrels of oil per day by 2035. Brazil will also invest north of $9 billion in refining to increase efficiency, reduce carbon footprint, and ease its dependency on imported diesel, which is 25% of its demand. But this leftist and more environmentally focused administration, if I may, must streamline the complexities and not, I don't mean ease the requirements, but streamline the complexities of environmental permitting that stands in the way of such sector growth. Notwithstanding this focus on oil and gas that continues and will continue, it does not preclude a stronger emphasis on energy transition. A couple of weeks ago, in his inaugural speech to his employees, recently appointed CEO Jean-Paul Prates, who is an industry legal expert and PT senator, clearly stated that Petrobras is a fundamental lever in Brazil's economic development, that oil output will continue to grow, but with lower emissions. But at the meantime, Petrobras must lead the Brazilian energy transition process and diversify the domestic primary matrix with cleaner and renewable energies. Mind you that Brazil already leads the region in solar and wind deployments, and that 76% of its power generation comes from renewable sources.
And you mentioned briefly how there are foreign actors that enter Brazil and partner with Brazilian entities in the energy sector. And shifting a little bit to Venezuela, that was a huge movement recently when Chevron was reintroduced to Venezuela with the blessing of the U.S. government for the first time in years. And thinking a little bit more about Venezuela and Venezuela's oil production, especially in light of Chevron getting back into the country, what would you say is your outlook for Venezuela?
Well, we think there are enthusiasm for Venezuela's production. Abrupt recovery should be moderate. Venezuelan oil output has dropped from a peak of 3.4 million barrels a day in 1998 to about 0.7 million barrels a day today. That's an 80% drop over a quarter century. And that drop is the result of maybe three factors: diversion from operational to social investment by PDVSA, the government's discouraging the participation of the private oil and gas sector, and OFAC sanctions by the US. As a result, development and even maintenance have virtually stopped, including that of the electrical system that powers the oil fields. We wouldn't venture forecasting hefty production growth figures like some media do. We believe that Chevron, under this new contractual model, will focus on production rehabilitation of its existing producing assets, which means basically more OPEX than CAPEX. PDVSA will test this model and may decide to extend it to other operators, likely those not affected by OFAC sanctions. But this would be an unilateral Venezuelan decision. Global energy concerns or not, we do not see the US cheerleading a quantum recovery of Venezuelan oil production anytime soon. OFAC may grant more waivers, like Chevron's, but on a case-by-case basis. Let's also keep in mind that Venezuela's huge oil potential is for heavy and extra heavy crudes, which are expensive, energy expensive to lift and hard to decarbonize operationally. Latin America and the Caribbean hold 60% of our planet's heavy crude in an arc that extends from Venezuela through Colombia, Ecuador, and northern Peru, but the majority is in Venezuela. Encouraging the production of such heavy oil heavy fossil fuel will be contrary to the zeitgeist and be penalized in world markets. But Venezuela also happens to sit on the lion's share of gas resources in the region, which is the most environmentally palatable fossil fuel. A likely second waiver then may be for Venezuelan gas to be directed to the neighboring liquefaction and conversion idle capacity in Trinidad and Tobago. But we think that this doesn't mean that US sanctions should be blanket lifted anytime soon, at the very least, not until free elections are held in December 2024 and result in something more agreeable to US interests.
Well, it's very interesting that you mention this increasing focus on renewables, and in tandem, there is this plummeting of Venezuelan output, a whopping 82% from its peak, even though those two on the surface might appear seemingly unrelated. But it's not just Venezuela that's seen a massive decrease of production from its peak. Mexico as well, Pemex has struggled to operationally without the assistance of the Mexican government, unlike a lot of the other oil majors around the world. And Mexico's oil production has declined 37% from its peak. Moving the magnifying glass to Mexico, away from Venezuela, do you think that we can expect a reversal of this decline coming out of Mexico in 2023?
Well, I think Pemex is undergoing a massive investment. I think that it is not, there won't be any further licensing with foreign or private companies. So I think that component will be missing. So he's making an effort by Pemex alone. There is a huge potential in the deep water of the Gulf of Mexico, in the Mexican waters, that it severely needs foreign company or IOC, the technology and capital. And I don't think that's going to be realized anytime soon. I think they're going for the low-hanging fruit first.
I see. And of course, moving back down to South America, we have this potential wild card that is Guyana. Guyana's economy is expected to have grown by over 50% in 2022, which would have made it the largest growth on the entire planet, mostly due to recent discoveries of vast oil deposits in that tiny country. Would you say that Guyana has the potential to become a top-tier oil producer?
Well, the equatorial margin that is shared by Guyana, Suriname, and likely beyond into French Guiana and Brazil has very significant prospects due to the confluence of very favorable geological factors. The source rock is very prolific, the Guyana Shield provenance excellent sand sediments, and the platform and slope canyons provided efficient channels for and conduits for reservoir formation. There have been about 31 discoveries, if I'm not incorrect, and counting, and from about 400,000 barrels a day. Nowadays, output is expected to grow to 1.2 million barrels by 2027 and 1.7 million barrels by 2035, making it the fourth largest offshore producer. But for benchmarking purposes, Brazil's pre-salt by 2035 should be, like I said, at 7 to 9 million. So, which is fourfold what Guyana is expected to produce. It will be a significant player. I don't think will be a dominant player. The complication is that this bonanza, as you said, the spectacular growth from a very low basis, of course, will radically disrupt and transform two small economies like Guyana and Suriname. Of course, this implies great news for the population, but they can be shaded by the risk of Dutch disease or resource curse. But we know that we are in touch with both governments and they are contemplating this risk and taking proactive measures to keep their economies as diversified as possible, to protect the viabilities of their staple crops and their traditional industries, and to administer this bonanza for the long term and the benefit of future generations, like having a rainy day fund, more universities and trade schools, etc.
Right. So it's sounding like even though Latin America is clumped as one entity, when you look at it more granularly, different countries are going to be taking different directions. Guyana has to watch out for Dutch disease. Venezuela will remain depressed. Mexico is having a potential turnaround with Pemex. But zooming out, a lot of events are happening globally away from Latin America that could still impact its direction, right? We have the potential reintroduction of Iranian oil into markets. We have, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China's reopening, this increased emphasis on renewables and on the energy transition. To what extent do you think that developments outside of Latin America will impact the direction that Latin America takes this year?
Well, it's not easy to predict the net resultant of geopolitical factors that are in flux and that may have opposing effects on the region's hydrocarbon industry, and not even for the short term. But if you twist my arm, I will venture saying that the net effect is a compelling opportunity to export oil for Latin America, and more importantly, export natural gas as a replacement for coal and to provide source diversity in Europe and Asia. Besides Brazil's pre-salt, the Guyana's Suriname Fairway, Mexico's Gulf deepwater potential, and Argentina's Vaca Muerta, the elephant in the room, of course, is Venezuela. As I said before, its huge natural gas potential should be faster to come on stream than its huge heavy oil potential. But also regionally, beyond Venezuela, we expect an increase in EMP emphasis on natural gas, virtually a commodity nowadays and the ideal companion for energy transition. I must say that, like I said, Latin America is an eclectic region, and each country is a different situation. There are exporters, there are importers, there are countries that are self-sufficient. There are countries that are more shielded from climate change. There are countries that are insular or coastal and are more exposed to climate change. But as a whole, that means that you can't have an energy transition model that fits the world or that fits the region. You must have one model per country or per region within a country. Everybody always says, which is true, that energy transition should be just. What I mean is Latin America and the Caribbean has the world's cleanest primary energy matrix. We use only 5% of coal versus 27% globally. And we have 35% nuclear and renewable, which is double the global average. 61% of our power is generated from renewable sources. So we envision a trend towards even cleaner domestic energies and more hydrocarbon exports. Our regional hydrocarbon resources thus will continue to be developed with increasingly more efficient decarbonized operations and facilities, while meanwhile the share of renewable energy in the primary matrix will continue to grow. Will the region solve its versions of the trilemma and capitalize on this window of opportunity? Well, fingers crossed.
Well, of course, partnerships often come into play, and you've mentioned it earlier that whether the focus is on fossil fuels or on renewables, there is a pretty critical factor that foreign investment plays. And when it comes to foreign investment and when it comes to the elephant in the room, as you put it, concerning Venezuela, we have Russia that's on the prowl around the world and would probably love to fill the capital and knowledge gap that has been created through this Venezuelan brain drain of the past decade or so. What would you say is the likelihood that Russia would begin to fill these gaps and push out potentially other private sector partnerships that are only now starting to reemerge in the country?
I've seen more evidence about China filling the void aggressively in not only Latin America, but also in Africa. I think that I think in reality rules in the end. Particularly, this energy transition requires technology, and that technology must be transferred from people who know what they're doing about it. And normally, those are foreign international companies. At the same way that the national companies, ARPEL was founded by the national companies of the region of Latin America and the Caribbean in 1965. It then evolved to incorporate IOCs and the local independents and service companies. And we started as a forum for exchanging technology among national companies. And we helped in that. But in the end, technology was transferred by partnering with foreign companies. The national companies turned to partner with IOCs to have joint ventures or to have service contracts or to have even licenses. And that's how they capture technology. I think the same thing will have to be done to capture the new technologies that are needed for the energy transition.
Great. And as we round up on our half hour together, I welcome your closing remarks as well on how, for example, Brazil, that has had a good track record of foreign investment and that has instances of partnering with Petrobras But with Mexico and Venezuela, not so much. Venezuela, like you said, the global leader in proven oil reserves, 300 billion. Brazil only has about 15 billion barrels in proven reserves. Yet obviously, like you said, still far surpasses Venezuelan production, thanks in part to foreign investment. Do you think that the level of partnerships and flows in foreign investments will impact these trends, especially with this increasing focus on the elephant in the room, whether from China or from Russia or from other players in Venezuela? And I welcome your closing remarks on that
I,
topic.
I would always be cautious with what you said about the 303 billion barrels that Venezuela holds. Those are reported as proven reserves, and they give an ARPE ratio, reserves production ratio of about 18 centuries. And even if the production, instead of being 700,000 or 650,000 barrels a day today, we're back to the 3.5 million barrels a day, that RP would be like 283 years. So there is probably something of a reserve qualification issue of what is a proven reserve. And maybe I don't think that proven reserves of oil are 303 billion. And remember that those are basically ultra heavy crude. And to be proven, they have to be economically feasible today, and they have to be delineated, etc. And they have to have the facilities today. So there is a lot of potential. That the potential is there. I don't think it's proven, but the potential is there. Now, to attract foreign, I think foreign investment must be attracted in fair terms. And the basis for that is what Brazil does, for instance, that you have contractual security. Contracts are respected, there is judicial independence, and the companies are able to take their crude or to take their profits out of the country again. So I think that's paramount. Mexico has not violated contracts. They have frozen future contracts, but they're respecting the existing contracts. Venezuela has a bad track record of nationalizing and so forth. So, but I think, like you said, the price is there. So I think once there is a change of heart in the administration, and there's more transparency, and there's in judiciary independence, and there's a track record of contracts are respected. I think that foreign investment, Russia, China, or from the West, are going to come back.
Great. Well, definitely contracts and judicial independence paramount to helping the region and each country in the region live up to its potential. And we'll have to wrap it up there, but thank you so much. Our time together has come to an end. We've had an interesting discussion around the outlook for Latin America in the energy sector for the rest of the year, and how its direction goes hand in hand with the geopolitical developments that we've seen so far. For those listening, feel free to follow Gulf Intelligence for more insights as the interview series progresses. Thank you very much, Carlos, for joining us today. We appreciate your time and insights, and we look forward to welcoming you again in the future.
Thank you for having me.